Good. Okie doke. Right, let's get the slides up again, and then I'll cue you in. Ian, bear with me a minute. There we go. Lovely stuff. Welcome, everybody. Very nice to see you. This is our last session of 2022. It's an expert at work session, so it's for members of all three of our networks, and it's entitled Enabling a Data-Driven HR Function. You've heard, we'll be recording this session, and it's a big welcome to Ian Grant. Ian is Director of People Insight and Analytics at Standard Chartered Bank. Thanks ever so much for doing this, Ian, much appreciated. Ian's speaking for 15-20 minutes or so, maybe a bit longer, and we'll send everyone Ian's slides afterwards, and of course the recording. There should be 15-20 minutes at least for Q&A at the end. No breakout rooms for this one, but if you have any points you'd like to make, just raise your hand and we'll come to you during Ian's presentation, or just hit chat and we can save them all up for afterwards. Either good, whatever's best for you. So please put yourselves on mute for now if you would. We're heading for a half finish at 11:45, by the way. Ian, the floor is yours, and just as I say, give us a shout when you want the next slide and we'll move it on. Thank you again.
Yeah, cheers, Richard. Thank you very much for the invite, and nice to meet everybody on the call, even virtually. So it's nice to be here to talk about a topic which I'm very passionate about, and I think one which is becoming more and more relevant as HR practitioners as we go into the future. So just a bit of background to myself. So thanks for the intro, Richard. So I've been at Standard Chartered now for coming up to 3 years. So my official job title is Head of People Insights Partnering, which is essentially the front office part of our People Insights and Analytics function. So the team that goes and speaks to the business, speaks to HR business partners, speaks to heads of HR to understand business problems, deliver insights, analytics to drive better decision making across the organisation. So I've been at Standard Chartered for about 3 years. My general background is I've been working in people analytics now for over 15 years, I think. I was an HR practitioner by trade when I started out my career a while ago now. So I have been on both sides of the fence, but I guess most of my career has been spent in people analytics in fairly large organisations, albeit I did join Standard Chartered from a startup. So I've been on that side of the fence as well, which was interesting. If you just want to go on to the next one, Richard, for the agenda. So I thought what we cover today is a few things, and I appreciate that we've got many different sort of organisations on the call in terms of different sizes, shapes, geographic footprints, etc. But I think that the topic is relevant irrespective of how big the organisation is, albeit some of the journey that we've been on to date is probably more targeted towards the larger type of organisation. So Standard Chartered being about 85,000 people globally in lots of different countries. But to my point, the relevance to this, I think, is important to everybody on the call in terms of how we look and build a data-driven HR function. So the main topics today is just to talk a bit about the journey that we've been on at Standard Chartered along this topic. We have not finished this journey yet. We're probably just past the starting post, I would say, at the moment. But I thought it would be interesting to share our learnings to date. We've been looking at this for about 6 to 9 months now. We'll talk a bit about some of the blockers that we found, some of the reasons for why we want to do this, why we think it's important. And then just be great to open this up to a discussion for myself to pitch some ideas from you guys if you're looking at this yourselves and anything you've done which works, but also just to share some thoughts and ideas across the group in terms of what you feel resonates with you, other things that you might want to look at in more detail, and just to give you guys some ideas and tips to take away back to your own organisations. So just moving on, Richard, to the slide after this one, please, around why build a data-driven HR function. So for us at Standard Chartered, we sort of put it down to two main areas here. So around delivering cultural and commercial value, and for us this is a few things. So first of all, it's about enabling HR and the business to be better at making evidence-based decision making to address strategic business challenges and opportunities. And there's benefits to the organisation for doing this. Obviously, more commercial benefits, better business results. There's benefits for our colleagues and employees in our companies around better employee experience through richer employee insights, but also making efficient and effective fulfilment of our HR operational processes. And if you think about your company and other companies you've worked in, many organisations have been doing this for many, many years, but in other business functions such as marketing insights, analytics, customer insights, finance, they're much more advanced than HR has typically been in this space. And HR has been catching up over the past sort of 5 to 10 years. In Standard Chartered, we're now hearing much more from our CHRO and our HR management team about what does the data tell us in terms of how they address answering a business problem, for example, rather than historically going with a gut feel that this probably feels about right, so therefore we should go with this decision. Everything is now coming back to the first question is, well, what are the insights on this? What should we do? However, typically in organizations of all sizes, people insights and analytics teams tend to be quite small, tend to be pretty busy and pretty stretched. So data-driven HR goes beyond just delivering commercial and business value, because it's enabling the HR function and the businesses as a whole to be more self-serving their own insights through better self-service reports and dashboards themselves. So down the bottom, the second part of this for us is around enabling scale via self-service, as the header suggests there. So it's putting data in the hands of our HR business partners, our HR advisors, heads of HR, but also business users themselves, so they can start to become more data savvy and build confidence and competence and confident to use data to drive their own decision making. So just moving on, Richard, if that's okay. So we sort of split this into a couple of different areas here. So one is the strategic driven part of this, and the other is the operational part, both of which are equally as important, I would say, but both of which need slightly different sort of things to look at them in terms of to answer the different areas here. So from a strategic data-driven HR perspective, this is around, again, commercial value, delivering value and impact to the business and employees, providing insights that informs decision making. From the operational data-driven point, it's to make sure that HR data, people data, is in place at the right time in the right place for people to fulfill HR processes, to make better decisions on an operational basis. I always talk about recruitment here. Recruitment is a great area for having really, really great operational HR data, for example, to tell you how quickly you fill roles, what's the volume of recruitment, capacity against resourcing teams, etc. Which sources are our hires coming from, for example. It's really good quality operational data. The strategic side of that is then the sort of the so what. So what happens to these people once they join the organisation? What do they go on to do? So I think this quite nicely splits between, you know, the strategic and the operational side of why you would do this. But again, from a strategic point, it's not just focused on people data. It's also linking people data to business data, to other parts of finance data, for example, commercial data, because the data-driven HR function is not just focused on HR. It should be focused on the business as well. So just moving on to slide 7, if that's okay, Richard. Yeah. So we're just trying to bring this to life a bit here. So typically what people insights analytics functions have looked at in the past is very much stuck in the sort of the descriptive answer, the top left-hand side there. So as an example to follow through with this, and this is typically questions that we've been asked by our HR business partners, for example, is what happened to attrition rates in the past, for example, of senior females, for example, to use a relevant example at Standard Chartered. Have we seen higher rates of female attrition for our senior roles compared to men, for example? Now, we can answer that question. It's a good question, and it only tells you part of the story. It just tells you what's happened in the past. So moving on to a more diagnostic question is, well, why was this higher for women than it was for men, for example? And we can start to dig deeper. The questions are getting slightly more strategic. And then to take that the next step is, what do we think is going to happen in the future? Why do we think our female attrition is going to be more than men in the future? What do we think is driving that? And then get to the recommended part, the prescriptive bit, which is why do we need to reduce female attrition at all? Is there something that we need to look at for men, for example? What are the potential recommendations and solutions that we need to look at to solve this problem? So you see the questions are getting slightly different as you get down the list there, and it's becoming more sort of strategic type of response. So the questions asked and answered need to be HR related, but they should be aligned to strategic business problems and opportunities. For example, what are the people factors impacting productivity? How do we retain more of our critical roles that are driving our group strategy, for example? And to deliver it value at scale, it's important that users of HR data have the skills, the tools, and the access to be able to self-serve some of this themselves. This reduces the risk of the people insights and analytics teams, if you have those, or reporting analysts, whatever they might be, being the bottleneck to sort of lower value type requests, and it creates capacity for people in my team, for example, to focus on more complex use cases requiring more advanced analytics capability. And just to move on to the next one, please, Richard. So we like this triangle because I think it sort of starts to draw out what a data-driven HR function can look like, and it brings some clarity to roles and responsibilities. So we've got the people inside analytics team on the left-hand side, if the organisations have one of those. We have the HR business users down the right-hand side. So starting from the bottom, you can see operational reporting moving up to real commercial dollar-driven value right at the top. And the roles are slightly different depending on which bucket you're looking at. So, for example, it's a responsibility of an insight and analytics team to maintain a quality portfolio of operational reports, so operational reporting down the bottom, to contain the metrics that people need in HR and the business to answer some of their basic requests. From the HR, the business user side, it needs to be a consistent access to this reporting portfolio that users can then self-serve, generate insights themselves to support their operational needs, for example. That leads up to the next level, which is regular insights, which is access to these dashboards, but then being able to turn that into something which is answering business questions. And as you get further up to the top, the use cases and the questions become more complicated and more value driven. So, for example, the dollar one at the top, from the people insight and analytics team, this is about providing actionable insights to inform high value decision making, and delivers value by addressing business problems and opportunities. And on the HR business user side, it's helping to translate these insights and influence decision making to deliver this value and impact to solve these problems. So different types of responsibilities at different levels of the pyramid. If we just go on to slide 10, please. So we're just going to talk a bit more about our journey here. So we've, as I said at the start of the call, we started looking at this around sort of March, April time this year, when it came to realise that our team is quite over-capacitized to cover everything in the business, and we want to make sure that our business users and HRBPs, etc., are able to do this themselves. So we sort of put this into 5 buckets. Yeah, so the process one is around revamping how data is managed from a process standpoint and looking to build efficiencies through automation and simplification. The people part, which I think is probably the most complicated one, the most challenging one, is about how we bring a cultural mindset and skill set change for HR to realise the need to be data driven and to parallelly work on enhancing user experience to make things simpler, faster and better for these users, so they can help solve their business problems. To give an example, at Standard Chartered, we currently, or we historically didn't have using people data to help inform commercial decisions in an HR business partner's job description, for example. So that's something that we recognised that other organisations were doing this. We weren't doing this, so something as simple as that, just adding into somebody's role profile has made a real big difference there for just starting to change that cultural mindset. There's a lot more to do in this space. Technology and data is about making sure that our data is in the same place. So again, I can't speak for the organisations on the call, but to speak for us, we have data in many different places, lots of different systems. They don't always talk to each other, and that makes it harder to draw different insights together and connect the dots. Often takes a lot of time to do things and is overly complicated. So redesigning these data models, connecting data sources together is really fundamental to us. Excuse me. And then the final part around governance is ensuring that we have the necessary security in place to make sure that this is done in the right way. And this is also around developing ethical frameworks to act as principles for guardrails for doing this sort of stuff. We have an ethics working group at the bank, of which people data is part of this. And ethics is, of course, more about the should we do this rather than the can we do this. And we're trying to build that into these process steps as well. Just moving on to the next one, please, Richard. Thanks. So to get to these boxes, we spent some time earlier in the year doing some interviews with some of our management team, HR management team, and senior HR business partners, just to find out what they were thinking about things at the moment as to why things maybe weren't working from a data-driven perspective as much as we want them to. If I just focus on the HR perspective, so what our colleagues were telling us was that things were overwhelming. There are many different complex data sources. how do they decide which ones to share with their users and with their business teams? How do they translate these into recommendations and actions? There's a bit of a knowledge gap between this. There's a skills and capability issue. They were struggling to find the time with this. They understood the need to be more data driven, but they just didn't have the time to do this themselves. There's an expectation that it wasn't their job, that this was the job of the centres of expertise, for example, people insights and analytics, to generate insights on data and analytics, even at more operational, lower level type requests, because they didn't have the time or necessary capability to be able to do this. And then more at the top around the operational focus. So, they were saying they do provide these reports, but they struggle to then turn these into recommended actions and things to then follow that through, which is where they needed our support. From our side, so the PIA being People Insights and Analytics, we were getting frustrated around the level of tactical requests that were coming to us, operational requests, the capacity and ability to deliver across all of these different requests across a large organisation. So these are the sort of things that we were being told. Just moving on to slide 12, please. So we also looked at ourselves as a team and reflected on recent demands behaviours to look at what we were struggling with. And some of the things that we found was there was still some analysis paralysis. So we would maybe do some more interesting strategic type requests for business users, but instead of looking at what recommendations could you take off the back of this, there were just requests for more and more cuts of the data, for example, which wasn't really adding a huge amount of extra value to this. We still found that people needed a lot of support to translate insights into actions, for example, and that there's an unwillingness to connect data from multiple sources together themselves, and they still needed a lot of reliance on us to be able to do this. So we started to think about just how we can sort of set this up to enable us as a team to work on more strategic type business requests, but also enable our HR BPs in the business to start to do more of this themselves, to make their jobs easier, but also to make them slightly more sort of commercially aware. So just going on to the next steps, and then I'll stop. So these were taken directly from the presentation that we took to our HR management team about this. So the bullet points are essentially things that we were asking for as requests from our HR management team in terms of how we can make this work. So just to pick out a few here. So around the operating model, for example, was to have an end-to-end operating model that describes where and how data is extracted to support delivery of enhanced reporting, and to make sure that we enable our users to uncover more of this data themselves. Upskilling and enablement is about upskilling, being supportive in our upskilling and enabling of our HR colleagues to use data to help build their data confidence and make them more competent to take data and turn it into insights that drive business value in commercial discussions. And also we committed to putting our colleagues at the centre of any of these processes to make sure that anything that we design from a reporting perspective is really going to be user-friendly, intuitive, which supports both their operational and strategic needs. And just moving on to the last one, please. And then we had some specific requests of our senior leaders, which was to role model data-driven decision-making in their own teams. So ask our senior HR management team, for example, to do this themselves, to provide coaching and support to their teams through their senior HR business partners to help them with asking the right questions and aligning business problems and opportunities. To help their teams by promoting and encouraging upskilling, to take advantage of all the data that's out there, to go and use it, to give recognition around highlighting and rewarding work that is truly data driven and which has been enabled through generating self-serviced insights. And also to ensure and to encourage their teams to be more commercially focused on business problems and opportunities, and guide them to prioritise their efforts and their requests to our team to ensure they're only ones with the highest potential return on commercial investment, etc. And then finally was around just overall support. So recognising the fact that becoming a more data-driven HR function is a huge value opportunity for the organisation, for HR, and to really support us as we went on this journey. So the next steps for us, I mean, we have sort of buy-in to do this now. We're setting ourselves up around next year, particularly around the cultural piece, which I think is going to be the biggest challenge. the democratization and dashboards, etc., is within our own remit to build and design. But then the hardest bit is to go in and get people to use it and to make sure that we're supporting our HRBPs to use this data themselves to answer better and more interesting business problems. So I'll stop there. So I've been talking a lot.
That was great. Thank you ever so much, Ian. I thought that was really interesting. I love some of the ways you're thinking about this stuff was really striking. I love that the when you looked in was that slide about on that split into two and what's going well, what's not going so well, and the triangle as well. I thought was very powerful. Ian, thank you ever so much. So throwing it open to questions now, things that you'd like to ask Ian, points you'd like to make. Also, from your point of view, how does this stack up? We might be doing something very differently in this space or might want to. So yeah, love to hear from you. Raise your hand if you would, and I'll come to you immediately. Mr. Mellor, you're muted. No, you're not.
Someone had to go first, didn't they? Thanks, Ian. Really, really interesting. I guess having been a HR generalist for the majority of my career to date, I'm interested in the reaction of the business partner community when you're going to them with this, because I would imagine on one hand, there's a population of people who are pretty excited and can see the value, but there's probably a reverse of that, which is, I know my business areas, I know, you know, the things that need to happen in order to change and evolve and deliver. And, you know, part of the skill of a business partner, I guess, is understanding, observing. How have you planned to navigate some of the detractors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there is a bit of a mixed group, I would say. There are HR business partners, senior HRBPs, etc., who are really on board with this and have been doing this, I would say, not to use the word better, but I can't think of a different word. So they have been doing this more and more, and they have been doing this better than some other colleagues, for example. It's a very new skill, really, that we're asking for from a traditional HR business partner. I mean, I've been in HR for, well, about 20 years now, I would say, and this is something that wasn't traditionally asked of our HR business partners, who were typically, I don't mean to do any discredit here, but it was typically more operationally focused, which had value, but it was typically more operationally focused. And we're asking some different questions here. In terms of how we're addressing it, I think it's just it's helping to take them on the journey with us, I think. So we're going to be forming these a number of different plans of attack, I guess, to make sure that we're upskilling people at the same time as making things easier for them, because our dashboards are a bit of a mess at the moment in terms of they can be all over the place. They're not necessarily the most user friendly. So encouraging just basic user experience of people to go in and look at a dashboard, which they then go in and doesn't look or work particularly well, is something we need to fix. What we're asking for from their side is the proactiveness to want to get involved in this. So once these dashboards are ready for them to use, they go in and know how to use them. They're upskilled and trained on how to do it, and then we support them with how they then interpret some of the insights to take those out to answer the business problems. And we've got a small team developed and sort of dedicated to working on this next year. So to give a very basic example, we will have people in our team that will go and demo dashboards pretty much non-stop to people in the first quarter of next year, maybe once, twice, 3 times, but on the 4th time you need to go and do it yourselves. And if you're still struggling to do it yourselves, then that's a slightly different question. You don't have the answer to what we're going to do with that, but that's the sort of the approach we're going to be taking. Now, I appreciate that not all organizations have the size of the teams and the resource to be able to do that, of course not, but we have a couple of people that are just going to be funded to do that basically next year.
Interesting. What's your feeling, Alan?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said this is a new skill set, a new ask that you're trying to put to people, which absolutely resonates with me in terms of some of the challenges. So I work for Michael Kors. We're relatively small compared to you guys, so we don't have all of that infrastructure, but we do have some of the systems capability. So there's I think coming to this type of conversation is the opportunity to give the nudge of okay, we can't do what you're doing because it's a different business and it require different things, but there's definitely stuff we can do here to kind of evolve and become more data reliant. So thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Alan. Before I go to Kathy, let's go to Angela first. Hello, Angela.
Hello. My question's kind of aligned with that, and we definitely are on the very small side, and therefore our skills capability is pretty limited. But I think the skills element for me, I'm interested in how you overcome the fact that a business partner is not doing this stuff all the time. Therefore, you can go and run a workshop in how you build pivot tables or whatever, but how do you keep that stuff living for people? I guess aligned with that, I'm interested in who's using what systems. We're now working quite well with Workday, but the reporting capability and ability for individuals to self-serve on that is still too dependent upon a specialist within our team.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's often the case in many organisations. It does, to my point during the slides, it does tend to rely on one person. I don't think so. I think the way we address it is we make it as user friendly and accessible as possible. I think that's the first point. So none of this is about explaining and training HR business partners to be Excel experts or pivot table experts. That's not what this is about. That should be done for them in these reports and dashboards. So to use a very simple example of an attrition report, for example, how many people are leaving, there should be a product which is out there for people to go and look at themselves, which gives them pretty much the answer to 90 to 95% of the questions that they have about why people are leaving in the organization that you're in and where those people are, who they are, etc., from an aggregated perspective.
Yeah.
The key bit is excuse me, what do you do with that? And I think the key skill is how we help our HRBPs to then take that information to their management teams that they go and speak to then translate that into action and recommendations. And I think that's the bit where we're going to really focus on in terms of the upskilling bit. And it's about upskilling. You know, we might be potentially getting some external support to come and help us to do this sort of thing. I mean, I'm not an expert in how to do this, so I can do the first bit in terms of helping design dashboards to make them better and accessible, etc. But not the second bit. But you know, we can help to the extent of helping them to answer and ask the right business questions in the first place. I mean, we have questions asked to us about, you know, is attrition, what are our attrition rates for certain parts of the business? And the first question is, well, is it causing you a problem? And actually, that totally gets people to rethink the question that they're asking. And actually, well, maybe not, because we're making money or whatever. Is that really the problem you need to solve? So, you know, it's things like that I think can help people. But no, it's not about training people to do pivot tables and things. It's about making sure that's all there for them and they can go in and get what they need to.
Okay. We haven't quite got that luxury and resource that's available to us right now. So perhaps we need to think about where we're putting any external effort to help at that end.
Thanks, Angela. And just pointing to the chat where there's thank you, Penny and Lisa and Jane and others and Amy about systems, which is just developing there. Thank you for answering that question. Kathy, over to you.
Yes, it's a question for Ian, but also really anybody else in the group, because really recognise the importance of data and data-driven solutions, and our EDI work is completely driven now by data and the sort of difference in experience and sort of linking our engagement data to our diversity data and the insights we're getting and that. But we're having to make really challenging trade-offs within the people team over how we get the resource onto the data side, and then what we sort of lose elsewhere to be able to put resource on that. And that's quite an uncomfortable thing for us. I'm just wondering if there's any experiences or anything else, any insights from other teams about sort of navigating that. Obviously, I'm, you know, banging the drum for extra resource, which seems to be the solution, but that doesn't always feel realistic when we're in sort of straightened times. any insights or any other people that have been through this sort of similar journey and telling me that it's going to be worth it when we come out the other end.
Kathy, I don't know if it helps. I can just share sort of where we're at the minute. So tech company, 50,000 people across the globe, so fairly sizable. We do use Workday. But we're quite immature in terms of it's still Excel, raw data, HRBPs doing their own pivots, calculations, all that, and it just takes up far too much of their time, and it means they spend their time in talking about the number rather than drawing the insight from it and saying so what, to Ian's point. So we've started working more closely with a couple of specialist consultants on Workday, CloudRock being one of them, Workday themselves, to say, come and teach us how we're not quite driving this Ferrari in fifth gear, so to speak, and that is exactly what Workday is saying to us. You've bought this from us and you really are not using it to its full capability. So I think that's the secret to unlocking it, because if we can get the automation and the user experience kind of switched on better, we shouldn't, in theory, need the resource, because it should all just be through the system and the AI. So we haven't done it yet. We haven't fixed it yet, but that's where we're at the minute. So having those, really bringing Workday in and saying, tell us how to flip and use this system, Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Is that something that you could do though as well, Kathy, or is yours more?
So I think the interesting, so we don't use Workday, but I think getting that external support in to help us build what we need to build, and perhaps do that so that we're able to do things in a much more efficient way.
Yeah,
I think we could do that. I think we're trying to build it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, whatever HRIS you've got, my advice is just bring in some experts to teach you how to use it even better, because you paid for it. You might as well use it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think central governance around tech solutions as well is important, because I mean, speaking for us, I mean, we've onboarded a lot of different tech in the past X number of years to cover different HR processes. So tech for employee listening surveys, for example, tech for talent resourcing is a different piece of tech, and they're not always necessarily joined up, because they're often brought in, standalone. So I think having that sort of governance around how you do things right first time to make sure that everything's integrated at least somehow, I think is helpful for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Just before I go to Warren, I just want to say Laura's put something on in the chat, a request for recommendations for external support with data. Just pointing in that direction if anyone has any other ideas on that. Thanks, Kathy. Warren.
Hi. Probably a question for Ian, and maybe talks a little bit to Alan's point, is whether you started from almost the problem, because if somebody will tell you not only what they want to know, but why, and you could actually create a case around that, you can begin to show people why this is beneficial, as opposed to, and particularly if it's a strategic problem, the ability of HR to both inform and shape strategy with its data. If you've got something that you can almost use as a bit of a unicorn to go after that, I think can be quite helpful. I'm talking from a position of previous use, and that worked. Interestingly, where I am now, we have nothing. We're literally on spreadsheets and people moving data around, but we're about to integrate finance, HR, and everything we do for our pupil and parent management into one suite of systems, and they all talk to each other. We think, and the question we asked was, well, what don't I know? And there's tons we don't know. It should actually start to spit out a lot of this and save our people. And I've only got 2 HR in an organisation of 350 staff, an awful lot of time, because at the moment they're wasting all of it. So, but whether you've used that or used any sort of unicorn projects to sort of show that this works as opposed to building bottom up, I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it did start top down. I think this. So it initially came from our chief HR officer being very data driven, very data focused herself, and very passionate about the space. And as our team grew, probably back end of 2020, we started delivering some, what I would say, more strategic value use cases for her and her management team. not necessarily on delivering really top level commercial stuff, but actually getting into topics like attrition in a much more detail, being able to start predicting attrition and those sort of things. But of course, we're still quite a small team, and I think that the challenge then came. Well, she as our head of HR wanted more of this across the rest of the organisation, and people were saying, well, why are we getting this service from this team? Well, it's because we're really stretched and we can't deliver to everybody the same level of depth of project that we can deliver to the top level management team, who are then going on to make actual proper business decisions based on this data. So that's what I think where it came from, because we just started to think, well, how do we do this? Because we don't have an infinite budget to grow our team. At the same time, we want to make sure that the rest of the HR organisation of the business can start to do this more themselves. So it sort of came top down, then bottom up, I guess.
Do raise your hand if there's more questions. We'd love to hear from you. There's time for at least one more, I reckon, but I'm just going to dip in while we wait for that next raised hand and ask you, Ian, as a people insights and analytics expert, what would you like to see more of from HR? I know you've covered this to an extent in the presentation, but now you have a network of HR people in front of you. So what would you like to see us do more of, or less of, possibly?
Yeah, I think it's around partnering with what the key business questions are. I think that's the key for me. And I think sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to get to the crux of what the actual issue is when we're working with our HR colleagues. So to give the example again of the attrition question, is like, can you do all this analysis on attrition for X job family? And we simply ask, well, what problem is it causing? And that threw a few spanners into the works, to be honest, because they couldn't answer that question. And I think when they actually went back to ask their business, because it wasn't just HR, sorry, it's the business were asking this question as well. And we went back and said, well, what problem is it actually causing you? And they really struggled. So therefore, we didn't actually end up doing the work, because it wasn't any value in us doing that piece of work. It's actually that part of the business was performing well, and it wasn't really causing any major issues. So we just flipped the question around slightly. I think just that sort of commercial lens, I guess, and upskilling, not necessarily upskilling, but just having bring that commercial lens to questions, I think would be really beneficial. So it's all about a partnership at the end of the day between us and those teams.
Got you. Good answer. Thank you. Michelle, morning.
There we go. Let's find the mute button. So it was just more of a comment around having gone through something similar in a previous financial services organisation. We found that when we were introducing from a business partnering team perspective, sort of the different data, interesting data points, rather than it just being sort of BAU, that the quality conversations that the business partners were then having with the business, with the leaders, and the business partners feeling that they had more ownership of that, it almost just gained its own momentum in terms of gaining support from a business perspective, but within the HR team as well, where maybe a few people weren't as comfortable, kind of dealing with the data and the numbers. But the more we used it, and the more it kind of opened up different conversations, the value that then brought was just brilliant. So it was almost like we didn't need to sell, why are we changing our approach, why are we doing this, because the outcomes spoke for themselves. So from my perspective, I think it's just a case of using it more, integrating it into those business partnering conversations, and the confidence just really grew from that.
Like it. Sounds similar to what you've seen, Ian, as well, perhaps, or others?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot of recognition that you get as well in my team or as business partners, if you can really drive these commercial decision-making conversations. Absolutely.
Great. Excellent. Well, thanks, Michelle. Thanks. Oh, one last from Amy. Go for it. Sorry.
Hi, Ian. Just a sort of well, hopefully it's not going to be too complicated, but besides having an engagement survey, what other data might I collect working in a small business to sort of track retention and, hopefully sort of forecast?
Well, that's a bit of an open-ended question, I think. I'm not sure there's a specific answer for that. So there's a number of different ways you can do it. All of it involves some sort of statistical package which is needed to look at how you back out all the non-relevant factors to get to the main factors which are driving somebody to leave. I think you need to have a certain size of population to be able to look at it in terms of you can't really do it off 50 people, say, with any sort of confidence. You could, but I'm not sure how robust it would be. And actually, if you've only got 50 people, you might be able to figure it out just from knowing who the people are. Yeah. But I think you typically, the way you do it would be to line up all the potential factors which are relevant in the employee life cycle. So that we call the moments that matter. So when someone joins, when someone gets promoted, when someone moves internally, when somebody gets a pay increase, when somebody changes grade, the list is almost endless, really. You line those up, and you can use various techniques to identify that it's going to be X type of employee life cycle issue has a certain impact on someone's decision to leave. Is it the people that didn't get a pay increase of 5%? I'm making that up. Is it the people that didn't get a pay increase of 10% or 1%, whatever?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you need to get some proper stats to be able to figure that out.
All right, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is
I could talk about that for ages. Can't really answer that in a couple of minutes.
No, I appreciate it's quite a big subject, but thank you. That's given me a good idea. Thanks.
Yeah, there are some companies that can do that for you. So if you do a bit of research into it, there are packages that you can get, like Visio, for example, can do that. Experian have got a model which predicts attrition, for example. To name drop a couple, but obviously you have to pay for that.
Thanks ever so much, Amy. Thanks ever so much, Ian. Ian, really appreciate what you've done today, especially I can exclusively reveal Ian's not feeling very well and has still very professionally done this session, so we're very grateful to him, and is snowed in 50 centimeters.
My voice lasted, so I'm pleased about that.
It did. You did. We couldn't have told. Snowed in with 50 centimeters of snow, not 50 meters, as I nearly said. So thanks ever so much for all of you, and for all of your questions. Wishing you all a very happy Christmas. We'll see you next year, and the programs are in your inboxes. Ian, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay online, Ian. Amy, did you want some recommendations? Because I know about the...
No, it's fine. I was just checking out the chat here. So yeah, I like the start with the exit interviews, of course. Yeah, that's a good point. But that's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Merry Christmas.
And you.
Bye-bye.